I want to say thank you for joining us and spending about an hour of your day with us. We're excited to be sharing this with you. This is a webinar that we did about a year and a half ago and got some really good feedback and wanted to offer that again. And we're focusing on effective strategies with students with significant emotional and behavioral needs. My name is John Eiler. I'm the founder and CEO of Collaborative Learning Solutions. And co-presenting with me today is Kenny McCarthy, who is an educational consultant and leads really and is the expert in what we're sharing with you today. He's really done a lot of work to develop a lot of what you're going to be seeing and hearing about. I do recognize some of the names in here and faces, so thank you if you're already a partner with us, and we appreciate you being here. What I'd like to do for those of you who are new to who we are is just spend a little bit of time just sharing who are we as an organization. We are a consulting firm or consulting company in the K-12 space. We originally based out of Temecula, and we are making the transition to headquartering or moving headquarters to the Phoenix area. And that's where Kenny and I are both out of the Phoenix area. We have a Tempe office and are currently working from there now. We are a thought partner for school districts, for state education agencies. We've done some statewide projects both in California and Washington. We work with regional service centers, ESDs, or California county offices of education. And really our areas coming alongside and being a thought partner with them in areas of improvement, more specifically the culture climate area. And we've been doing this work for about 13 years. And so our hope today is really just to share some of that work with you and some of the learnings from this specific area of support that we've been providing. Additionally, as a mission, if you will, it's really these 7 words: to change the trajectory of marginalized youth. And however those margins are defined, that's something that has been our mission from day one and continues to be our mission today. We're really passionate about kids in the margins. I'd like to, before we jump into the strategies and kind of what you're going to be hearing from both Kenny and I wanted to start with just origin story. About 16 years ago, 15 or 16 years ago, I found myself working for county regional SELPA, if you will. California has SELPAs, the regionalized kind of service centers, if you will, for students with disabilities. And in that role, I had responsibility of overseeing all of our placements throughout the region for kids who are educated in a non-public school residential treatment facility. And at the time, we were serving about 23 school districts who served about 30,000 students with disabilities across our region. And the first 6 months of that, I went around and visited a lot of these organizations and came back feeling just really defeated in the sense that there wasn't a whole lot of mental health infrastructure that was a part of the program. There was mental health services that really mirrored kind of a clinical model of come in for a half an hour, 1 time a week or 2 times a week, but there really wasn't a pronounced like mental health component. And so what I did see was a lot of restraints, a lot of seclusion rooms, a lot of kind of control oriented, kind of stop the behavior, reduce the behavior types of strategies. And so that really kind of sent me on a mission to look at what else was out there. At the same time, I was doing my terminal degree at USC in educational psychology, focusing more on kind of the sociocultural elements of human behavior and motivation. And I just found a huge disconnect between what I was learning in higher education and what I was experiencing on the ground in practice. And so after about 4 years in that position, about 2010, I created a framework, a very loose framework, I would say. Kenny was really the one who helped land a lot of what you're seeing today, but created a framework, approached one of our partner districts at the time that we were supporting. I said, hey, what do you think about this idea of taking some of your students who are in a non-public and residential treatment facility, bringing them back onto a comprehensive campus? We'll use a social cognitive, sociocultural approach, and then we'll turn that program over to you within 3 years. And that director at the time said, yep, let's try it. And so that's what launched Collaborative Learning Solutions. So what we're hoping to do today is share with you that particular strategy, what we have learned over the past 13 years. What are we finding to be kind of the high leverage elements or components of a program? that serves students with significant needs. One of the major shifts in that program was, I wouldn't say a move from behavioral theory to social cognitive theory. It's really the infusion of some of these elements of social cognitive theory, and I would say sociocultural theory as well. So what I noticed in a lot of these programs is that whether it was a county run program, a district run program, a non-public school, residential treatment facility, a lot of the strategy was built around kind of this behavioristic mindset. And a lot of it was about reducing particular behaviors. And I thought there was more to it. And so what I wanted to do was create a framework that infused elements that really focused on cognition and some of the personal factors. And so this is, many of you may be familiar with Bandura's triadic reciprocality model, if you will. And so that's what's represented here. And our focus in these programs was really to hone in on these personal factors. And specifically it was the thinking. The idea was if we can shift the thinking of kids, then we can shift the behavior of kids, if not immediately long-term. And so that was really kind of the big shift or change, if you will, with the framework that we put together for working with students with significant needs. So this is kind of the 5, if you will. We call this the C5 or the Core 5 program. We wanted to kind of push up against the status quo of what was currently occurring within programs serving this population. And so today we're going to focus just on the bottom 3, or the center 3, if you will: authentic relationships, rigorous skill development, and cognitive collaboration. And so the way that we have thought about this is, what we'd like to do is give you some kind of thinking around that. Here's the concept of what that means when we say that's a core element or a core component of programs. And then we also want to do some storytelling and just share some of the experiences that I've had with students, that Kenny has had with students and staff. And hopefully you will take away some of those strategies that would be helpful for you. Another thing we wanted to do is about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, when we first started doing this, we wanted to make an explicit connection to mental health. And so what you see on the left-hand side are elements, if you will, of factors, if you will, of building positive mental health. And so authentic relationship is the first one we're going to focus on. It's connected to the first 2 bullets up at the top. Resiliency and having a relationship of one caring adult. When you look at resiliency in youth, adolescents specifically, the #1 factor in terms of resiliency is one relationship with one adult. And so what we wanted to do is dig into that with you in terms of what does that actually look like. And so we're going to dive into this first element: authentic relationships. What you'll see on the left is one of the things I noticed just being in education and visiting a lot of these programs was that a lot of the structure of relationships were defined by a lot of these words that you see on the left. Social contract, they were transactional in nature, contingency oriented. We hear things like, this is my classroom, these are my rules, this is the way we do things. If you do this, then I do that. If you're at this level on the point system, then this will happen relationally. You can, engage in this game that we're playing. We can, have a positive, we call them one-on-ones, but the idea was that there was something the student needed to earn to be able to gain something relationally, whether it was with an adult or another student. And so what we want to do is kind of push up against that and say, that's really not how relationships work outside of the 4 walls of a classroom. And, you'll hear me say this again later, a lot of these skills that we're wanting to develop in kids are learned through implicit interactions in day-to-day. I mean, the idea that you learn forgiveness or resiliency out of a book is crazy to us. You really learn that through modeling with other people. So we kind of pushed up against that and really focused on the right-hand side. What would it look like if we actually had a high-trust, vulnerable relationship with kids? And this is really tough for adults to wrap their mind around, because it's not normal for an adult teacher or paraprofessional to demonstrate or to use vulnerability in a classroom with kids. And we wanted to create spaces where that was modeled. That was norm, because that's how kids learn to do that. We wanted genuine connections. We wanted, you shouldn't say that because that's the rule. We should say, you shouldn't say that because that's the way it impacts me. And if you care about me and I care about you, then we should take care of that relationship together. It was that type of genuine, authentic relationship. So you'll see some of the strategies that the things that we had to put in place to try to make that happen. But our from a authentic relationship perspective, our North Star was really focused on the right side of this. Kenny, I think you're gonna kick us off with some stories around these positive phone calls home.
Yeah, no, thanks, John. Did we want to try to do a connection activity before we dive into it, or should we just?
I'd say let's go ahead and jump in right
Okay.
now. Yep,
Yep.
I missed that. We're good.
Yep. So positive phone calls home, and it's exactly just as it's titled. It's very simple. We were just looking for things that kids were doing well throughout the week and making a positive phone call home to the caregiver. And as simple as that sounds, I know for me, as a special ed teacher in a program like this, it was actually pretty tough because so-and-so was cussing me out all week long. This kid kicked me or spit at me or tore up the schoolwork and whatnot. And so it really took effort for me to look for what the student did well. And this isn't to gloss over any of the maladaptive behaviors, but it was really to start training me to look at what the kid is doing adaptively and start making a connection. And so we did this on a regular basis. Each of our staff members would make phone calls home, and we'd kind of split up the caseload. And um, it was pretty interesting. One student in particular, he came in like on a Wednesday, and by Friday, I had made one of those positive phone calls home. And when the parent answered, she sounded very nervous. And this is a high school student, a 16-year-old. And I said, hey, this is so-and-so's teacher. I just wanted to let you know some things that your child's done well this week. And she's hesitant. Okay. And so I go on telling her, and she was almost in tears. She said, this is the first time anyone has ever called home for something positive as opposed to something negative. She said, I almost didn't answer because I knew it was you calling, and I assumed he was in trouble for something. And I said, no. I said, here's what it is. And she said, is that it? I said, yes, that's it. And she was floored. And so right from there, we made a connection. And when he got home that day, she let him know, hey, your teacher called and said you did these things well. And so it was a really quick and easy connection with the parent and with the student. And as that student continued in our program, he actually got in trouble on campus. And I'll back up real quick here. This is a student that was in a non-public school program before he came to my classroom, which is on a comprehensive high school campus. And so this student was on campus one day and he decided to go and smoke with some of his friends on campus. He got caught, got in trouble. The principal called me up. And so we processed through with it. And so I talked to the principal separately and I said, I understand what he did. And, I understand he needs to go home for the day because he can't be intoxicated at school. I said, can he come back tomorrow? And he was like, whoa, this is a pretty standard 3 to 5 day suspension. And I said, I understand that. But if he's suspended for the next 3 to 5 days, he will be in the community. He will not be at home. Mom does not have control of him. And so we worked on it and he worked with me. So he was suspended for the rest of the day and he came back the next day. And again, the parent was extremely grateful for it because she knew her son would be roaming around town. And not he was there for 2 years, never had a substance offense again while he was there. And again, it continued to build that relationship because what they understood was that I was looking out for the safety and well-being of that kid. So that's one of our practices, positive phone calls home, and it can really go a long way.
And if I can just add to that for a little bit, this is, if anyone's read the book Atomic Habits, this is one of those that I might put into that bucket. It seems really simple. It seems like, oh yeah, positive phone call home. I think this is just as challenging for adults because it's really easy for us to focus on what's not working well or what kids are not doing well or not doing what we want them to do within programs. that it really forces adults to say, nope, we're going to look for the positive. And you'll hear us talk about skill sets in a little bit. Positive phone calls home. We focused in the very early years on executive functioning skills. I think we've brought in that, over the last 13 years. But the positive phone calls home were generally framed in whatever the skill set was that we're looking for. And so we had some rules around this. It was at least monthly. We would have every student would have a positive phone call home. Every staff member was responsible for doing a positive phone call home. It wasn't just the teacher. And part of that is we wanted adults, we wanted caregivers to hear our voice. It could be a text, it could be an email, but we also wanted to have like an actual more authentic conversation or phone call with parents. So sounds really easy, but it's high impact, high leverage in terms of what we've experienced, what we've seen with kids. I'm going to move to talk about I'll be very brief with this one. And then I think, Kenny, you've got one more story here. And let me just do this. I didn't say this in the very beginning. We would invite engagement using the reactions down at the bottom or putting stuff in the chat if you want to do that. We do have a section built towards the end for question and answer, which will ask you to unmute, if you will. But in the time being, we'll just keep the mute on until we get towards the end and have the Q&A session. But feel free to use the reaction in the chat. Right now, we've got a couple of our team members who are helping us monitor that as we go through. With this, I wanted to just create kind of a visual of what we're trying to get at on that right side of authentic relationships. And these are some examples of things that we did with kids early on. It's hard to demonstrate vulnerability. I used that as an example earlier, just within the four walls of a classroom. And so we did when we were running programs, we have encouraged districts and partnerships right now to build into the budget funding to be able to do things like what you're seeing in front of you. We would take kids to the gym 2 to 3 times a week. We would get memberships at a local gym, and you'll see that picture down at the bottom. We would do challenges. I'm represented in there. I think Ernie, one of our staff members, is represented in there. Kenny, I think you're somewhere in there. A couple of our students, but we were just doing a plank challenge. I want kids to be able to see what it takes for me to like push past the point of exhaustion. We took kids through the rock climbing gym, and it was awesome. The same kid that was, starting to get afraid and be fearful at 2 feet would see me be fearful and afraid when I got to my certain point, if you will. And so there was a lot of trust that had to be built in that. And it was okay to be vulnerable. It was okay to be scared in that space. So doing like real life events with kids is an opportunity and something that we would encourage to get outside of the 4 walls, if you will, to be able to model what some of those implicit skills look like and feel like. Kenny, I think this one is you.
Yep. Yeah, so one-on-ones, this is one of our other practices. And this again, it was organic the way it kind of happened. And what we noticed was students really liked individualized attention. They didn't necessarily get that at home, whether that's living with parents or group home or whatnot. And so what we found was students really appreciated time to be able to just kind of talk and share with us. And so one of the first times I ever did this, I asked the student, I said, hey, would you be willing to go out to lunch with me today? And he said, okay. I said, you can choose wherever we go. And so he chose Subway. And we go and we order our sandwiches and we go and sit down. And he says, okay, what do we have to talk about? And I said, I don't know. What do you want to talk about? And he said, well, like, am I in trouble for something? Like, why'd you bring me here? I said, it's just a time for us just to connect and hang out and have lunch together. And he said, really? I said, yeah. And so this kid talked a mile a minute. He talked for 60 minutes straight. And so I learned all about, he was really into cars. He was 15 at the time, but he was really interested in working on cars. He wanted to get a car, within the next year or so. And it was just the best thing for him. And so as we continued this practice, we kind of figured out what worked and what didn't work. One of the things that we would do is we would ask the kid at the beginning of the day, right when they came in the morning, because A few times we tried waiting and the kid was being a bit of a stinker, and I really didn't feel like taking him at that point. And so it made it a little bit harder. But this wasn't an earned outing. This was specifically to work on developing out our relationship together, an authentic relationship. So the kids didn't earn it. And oftentimes, what we would do at our staff meetings is we would actually choose the students that were really struggling. And it was an opportunity for us to connect with them. And oftentimes, things would come out. And they didn't have to. That wasn't the intent for them to spill everything to us, but that did happen. And so we definitely encourage, and there's a lot of ways that we can do one-on-ones. It doesn't necessarily have to be off-site. There's other programs we're working with that it's on-site, and they do it in a variety of ways. Again, we developed out rules for it. It's not more than one student. It's just one student specifically, and they can't ask for it either. And so again, we would work through, and students would each get one of these about once a month. I'm sorry, about once every 6 weeks is kind of how we worked it out. But really impactful, really effective for us.
Thanks, Kenny. I don't know if you mentioned this already. It wasn't just teacher, it was paraprofessionals would take turns and would rotate. We wanted to have kind of relationships with all adults in the space, not just kind of the teacher being the primary. I think the key point of that is it's not contingent. It's not contingent. And that shows a lot. You're taking me out even when I don't deserve to be. I've treated you like, horribly, and you're still taking me out. Yes. I love and I care about you, not because of what you do, but because of who you are. And it's an opportunity to send that message to kids. So,
And we actually had kids push back at times and say, like, I'm being an a-hole to you. Like, why are you being nice to me? Like, it really messed with the thinking in their head because that's not how they're used to being treated.
yeah.
And so that was part of our process, right? Kind of retraining some of that thinking.
Yep. It goes back to unconditional positive regard and authentic relationships. Our relationship is not defined by, whether or not you're flying sideways today, because we all have those days. It's defined on more the value of who you are as an individual. We're going to move into the next one, rigorous skill development. This sounds kind of like, yep, we obviously want to develop skills. I think this is extremely critical for a variety of reasons. One, a lot of the success in these programs are determined by the extent to which behavior exists or doesn't exist. So if we're looking, for example, at Marcus and whether we're going to transition Marcus into a less restrictive environment, one of the big questions is, well, how's his behavior, right? Is he doing the same behaviors? And yes, we obviously want to see that go down, but I think the North Star for what we would encourage and coach districts into is really more of, what are you seeing in terms of skill development? Is Marcus demonstrating the skills that we're wanting him to demonstrate across multiple settings or consistently throughout the day? That's more of the decision maker, if you will, in terms of readiness to move to a less restrictive environment, as opposed to, yeah, occasionally he's going to fly sideways. Most of us have those days. So having something that is defined, having something that is measurable, I think is key. So here's some examples of some things to think about. When you look at skills, you can identify a variety of skills. So there's cognitive skills, which you see on the left-hand side. We, as I mentioned before, tended to focus on these initially in the very beginning, 2010, 2011, 12, when we first started doing this work. And so they were executive functioning skills was kind of the North Star. And then we started to expand a little bit and say, okay, we're going to start working on some interpersonal skills, some emotional skills. But the nature of those positive phone calls home would be, hey, your daughter showed a lot of cognitive flexibility today. There were plenty of times where she could have gone off on so-and-so and she didn't. Or we changed the schedule around and she didn't. So she used a lot of inhibition. She used a lot of cognitive flexibility. That was what we were looking for and wanting to see more with kids. We would also give them feedback. Hey, you were really flexible with that today. Thank you for being flexible. So it doesn't really matter. I don't know that there's like if you focus on this skill set, it's higher leverage than that skill set. I think all of them are important. But if you're developing or redeveloping a program designed for kids, you should have kind of a preset set of skills that you're really focusing on. It helps staff identify what they want to see more of with kids. It also helps kids understand what it is that we're trying to teach them. I think many of us are familiar with CASEL, which you'll see kind of in the middle here. Some of us may be familiar with the EASL lab, which is out of the Harvard Graduate School of Education. If you're not, I would encourage you to check this out. What I love about the work that's coming out of the EASL lab is they have basically taken a lot of these SEL programs and they've mapped them into or categorized them into 6 different domains. And you'll see those across the top: cognitive, emotion, social, values, perspectives, and so on. And then what they've done is they've taken a look at, like, you'll look at CASEL, 17% of the CASEL competencies fall within the domain of cognitive, the cognitive domain. 17% fall within the emotional domain, 33% in the social domain. So if you have a particular SEL program that you're using, you can look at the extent to which those skills that are being taught are aligned with each of these domains. Here's some, I think this is in, Nico put a link in the chat for you to the presentation, but these links are embedded within the presentation for you to go check out. There's some great resources in there where they take a look at a variety of SEL programs and how heavy those are weighted in terms of the domains. And you're able to do a search as well. So if you're like, I want to target 9th through 12th graders and I really want to focus on cognitive, the cognitive domain, then it will say, here are some programs that are really good because they are heavily weighted in the cognitive domain. So I would just encourage you to take a look at that. If you're redoing or developing a program for students, it's critical that you have a defined skill set in the very beginning.
So this is CASEL's SEL core competencies. And here I have the relationship skills piece kind of circled. And kind of the focus here is, again, it's that skill development and how do we develop out these skills? Like John said, it could be executive functioning skills, etc. This one, I pick CASEL skills. Next slide, please.
Yep.
And so here's what we found. Initially, we're bringing students back from residential, non-public schools, or kids that are just really struggling in general with their social, emotional, and behavioral skills. And so we see this often, and I'm in classrooms about 2 to 3 weeks out of the month. And so definitely boots on the ground with staff, seeing what's going on, experiencing it. And it can be very difficult to get students to work together. And if we're trying to do English, science, whatever the core subjects are. And oftentimes what we find is we have students coming from opposing gangs, end up in the same classrooms together. We have students that have been at non-public schools together or residential placements that have been in fights in the past. And so there tends to be some history there. And so getting them to sit down and do an English lesson together is pretty tough. And so what we found out pretty early on was if we got kids doing something that they really enjoyed and that they haven't struggled with their whole life, maybe, like playing games. And so we did football, we did racquetball, we did dodgeball, all these different games. And really what that did was we were able to pick something that they're willing to try again and again, as opposed to being in the classroom where they gave up quickly and just went their separate ways. And we're able to build some skills. Okay. So if we look at those relationship skills, I mean, it's communication, it's social engagement. I mean, there's a whole slew of skills involved with playing games. And so by doing this, we were able to build their skills on a regular basis and transfer those skills then into the classroom. I know there's a lot of great SEL curriculum out there, and it's great to get students introduced to these skills. But from there, we have to be able to help students apply the skills. So just because they might learn about it during a lesson doesn't necessarily mean it's going to transfer. And so we want to make sure those skills are able to transfer from the classroom to the playground to out in their community. And so the ways we have to do that is by putting them in those environments and continue our coaching in those environments. It doesn't stop just in the classroom, but it needs to transfer to some other environments as well. And the next one is just, again, executive functioning skills. We're identifying some different skill sets. The next picture just kind of shows the ways we might be able to do that. And it doesn't have to be sports necessarily. We did this with board games. I see programs continue to do this with Uno, with checkers or Connect Four. And you will see kids get upset and the game will go flying across the room. And instead of it being just like, hey, that's maladaptive behavior, you're in trouble or you lose points, we're going to process through with the kids. And we're going to bring them back. They don't just lose the game, because that's what's typically done, right? You couldn't handle it, so the game's taken away. No, we're going to come back and we're going to teach you how to have adaptive skills. And we're going to work on it and we're going to target it. I was actually doing this last week. I was in programs, and again, this was high school programs. We had 12 of us, 3 staff members and 9 kids playing handball together. And so, I mean, if you were to really break down all the different skills necessary, not just the physical skills, but the social skills that were involved in just playing a game together. And 2 of those kids had just gotten in a fight the day before on the bus on the way to school. And I'll get to that story a little bit later. But yeah, we can move on to the next slide.
And if I can just add to this, I think a lot of sports in general is a good way to teach a lot of those social skills, inhibition skills, perspective taking skills. I remember a time we had, if there's space available, it's good to have kind of 2 separate rooms, one that's more adolescent oriented, kind of relax, game room, that type of thing, and then one that's more academically oriented. And we talk about, behavior being useful and that you code switch. Behavior is really about understanding the context and being able to match your behavior to what the context and the environment needs of you at that time. And so I remember walking into kind of the game room, if you will, in one of the early days, and one of the students saw me walk in, and he comes over and he almost like a big bear hug, but it was also a bear hug that pushed me up against the wall. And so it was one of those situations where most teachers would be like, wow, I was attacked by the kid or assaultive or what have you. And we encourage the kids to wrestle in that classroom. They would naturally want to, a lot of the boys would naturally want to do that. But we said, let's wrestle within the rules. Like, let's teach you the rules of how to wrestle so it didn't get out of hand. And so when I walked in the room, Jake kind of pinned me up against the wall. And I said, Jake, pause for a second and just look at my face. Is this game face, like I'm wanting to engage in the wrestling, or is this a serious face where I'm not into it? And it was just me being able to step outside of that to say, all right, read me, see me, understand where I'm at. And then he's like, oh, yeah, like it didn't even occur to him to think that maybe there was a facial expression that he should read or not read on me. So the sports piece is really good, or any type of game, I would say, is really good for teaching that. And it gives us opportunities to be able to step outside of it, help kids reflect on the experience, and pull out the skills that they used or hadn't used yet and need to learn how to use.
So this is just a connection to mental health. And so we know the most common reasons youth are referred to mental health evaluations or services is because of challenging behavior, and that's exhibited at home or at school. Okay. And so we just want to be able to address that mental health piece. And in I think the next month or 2, we are actually going to do an additional webinar, and we've invited one of the mental health practitioners that's currently in one of the programs that we are collaborating with, supporting, and one of our educational consultants that is a licensed marriage family therapist and was previously working in one of these programs. And so there's just it's a vital piece to really having success in these programs, and having that mental health person really directly involved and being in the classroom with students. So not only will they do kind of the individual therapy, but they're going to be directly in the classroom as well. Quick story. I know I've got a lot of stories, but we had one of our kids in high school, and this was a year into the program. And all of a sudden, our therapist, somehow it was identified that she was therapist for the program. And he said, "What? You're a therapist?" She's like, "Yes." And he's like, "Man, I would have never talked to you if I knew you were a therapist." But she was so ingrained into this program that it was just another human being that cared about him and was there to help him out. And so he didn't even realize that she was a therapist, even though he met with her individually, as well as being kind of engaged in the classroom as well. So I thought that was pretty funny. All right. So this here, this comes from Think Kids, and it's underneath Massachusetts General Hospital. And so they're working with kind of the same population of students. And this is what they call the thinking skills inventory. And it is geared at that, thinking skills. And so you'll see 5 different domains that they're looking at to support kids. And there's multiple of these that can be used. This is just an example of one of them. And I would say one of them that I really like and have found extremely valuable in working with kids. And we see a lot of behavior inventories, and they'll talk about kids hitting, kicking, spitting, depression, all of these things, which is, it's fine to use those. I'm not saying don't use those, but that can't be our only focus. Because if it is, all we're looking at is the maladaptive behaviors. And if we really want to get to kind of the core of the issues and whatnot, we need to look at skills. And not only that, but if we're looking at just decreasing certain behaviors, where do we go when it comes to increasing skill sets? And so this is one of those tools that helps with that. And on the next slide, we have, so thinkkids.org on the right, and then collaborative and proactive solutions on the left. These are just some suggested resources. Ross Green has what's called the Assessment of Lagging Skills and Unsolved Problems, the ALSUP. And for Think Kids, that's the Thinking Skills Inventory. And so they're very similar. I would also say look at CASEL's SEL competencies. And it's really up to our partners that we work with, which skill inventory that they want to use. The most important piece is that we identify a skills inventory and increasing desired skill sets. Now, this is a software program that we use. And with this software program, this particular partner of ours chose to use the Thinking Skills Inventory. This can be adapted to whatever inventory a district wants to use for their program. This particular district chose the Thinking Skills Inventory. And so what you'll see is, you'll see these are just fictitious students labeled. And then the legend on the right shows, is the student demonstrating this skill on a consistent basis? Is this a consistent strength for them? Or all the way down to a consistent difficulty? And so you'll see the list of skills. In this case, it's 32 skills in 5 different core areas. And so at least on a quarterly basis, those adults that are working with the students would go through and rate students on these particular skill areas. And from there, what we get is a readout that lets us know, hey, this student's doing well with these particular skills, and they're not doing so well, or they're not demonstrating it on a consistent basis in these particular skill areas. And so from there, we're able to target supports for that student. And we're targeting either the skills that they're doing well, and how can we use those to build on, and the skills that they're struggling with, and how can we provide interventions and support in that way. One of the other features with this particular software is the least restrictive environment indicator. And it's been really accurate for our partners so far to identify when are students ready to start transitioning back. And so what we see is we see an increase in skill development. Again, typically what we see is programs asking for is, hey, if there's an absence of behavior for so many weeks or so many days, that must mean you're ready to go back. But that's not necessarily the case. The student might have been able to just inhibit or hold back, which is valuable. That's a valuable skill. But if there's some significant gaps in other areas, we need to build those skill areas up so they are ready. They're more the pro-social skills. And we need to make sure that those skills are built up so they are ready to be successful. Because how often do we hear about students that we thought were going to do well, they transition back and it doesn't work out for them? And really what the student is letting you know is, I don't have the skill set necessary to be successful in that environment. And so we need some more help. And it takes a lot of practice too. Some pushback we might get on a skill is the adults will say, I've seen him do this before. He's just choosing not to do it. No, he doesn't have the ability to do it on a consistent basis. And so they need help doing it on a consistent basis. Just because you do something once doesn't mean you're able to do it on a consistent basis. And it also depends on the environment and what's going on with you. Um, I like to use road rage for adults because that seems to be something that adults can identify with. So you might have a skill set that you demonstrate on a consistent basis. And then when you get in that car and someone's cutting you off or you've been sitting in traffic for an hour, it might change your ability to demonstrate that skill consistently strong. And so it's something to work on.
Yep.
And I did kind of touch on this already as far as the school-based mental health approach. We really do kind of recommend and promote those mental health professionals being in the students' natural environment. And so, yes, it's great that students are getting mental health support, pulling out for individual therapy and sessions, but we've seen a lot more success when they're pushed into the programs. One of our partners within the last few years, they decided to go with more of that individual pullout type of model. And what was happening is the students were refusing. This person comes once a week for 30 minutes, like I'm not meeting with them. And this is a program that was really focused on students with more conduct challenges. And so they're like, yeah, I'm not doing that. I'm not meeting with that person. And so it didn't go well. And so once they got a person full-time in that program, those kids love it. The person in there, the therapist, is great with the kids. They're able to make connections. And so they're able to see them on a regular basis. And again, just to mention, we're going to have another webinar with those mental health professionals to go more in depth on what that looks like, boots on the ground.
Awesome. I'm going to move into our last one, cognitive collaboration. Before I do that, I want to go back to this just real quickly. For students who have IEPs, this has often been kind of the North Star, if you will, in terms of IEP goal writing. So it's tied to skill development with one of these particular skills, if the program is using the thinking skill inventory, for example. The other part, which we're not going to talk about today over here, you'll see this targeted growth. That's really around the importance of goal setting. And not just goal setting like within an IEP context, but goal setting both proximal and distal goals with kids. And so that's helpful to have like a TSI type of feedback for kids to look at and say, hey, we really see this in you. It's just not consistent yet. What can we do? Or is that even a priority for you to make that consistent? So just some connections there in terms of how we can be targeted with skill development as opposed to being solely focused on reduction of behaviors. Last part, cognitive collaboration. Kenny mentioned Ross Green, Stuart Ablon. Ross Green and Stuart Ablon, I believe, together have a book, Lost at School, or I'm not sure if that's just Ross Green, but Lost at School that kind of details collaborative problem solving. I think they were both kind of thought pioneers in that space of creating a model for that. So a lot of what you see there is going to be what we're going to share with you today. But the idea with cognitive collaboration is that we're removing kind of the temptation of adults to solve problems and placing that really within kids to help develop the cognitive skills to be able to do that. So traditional problem solving on the left-hand side, a lot of times we as the adults, we've had more kind of experience in life. We're oftentimes more complex in terms of our thinking. We're a little bit more developed in terms of our thinking strategies and skills. And so what we do is we analyze a situation and a problem, we come up with a solution or maybe three, and then we bring that to students and say, hey, why don't you think about trying this? And the problem with that is number one, I think it's a huge disservice to kids because we're not engaging them. We're not teaching them thinking skills by not allowing them to be part of the problem solving process. Secondly, I think it's a lost opportunity to be able to teach empathy with kids and understand the impact of what's happening. And so on the left-hand side is kind of what we see traditionally. We focus on replacement behaviors. We do the thinking, the analysis. We bring solutions to kids. We don't really partner with kids in coming up with solutions. And it really is a lost opportunity to develop a lot of the skill sets that we've mentioned earlier. So on the right-hand side is really a strategy where it's a kind of a structured strategy, if you will. And I'm going to run through an example of what it looks like. Kenny, I think you have one as well. But solutions are really generated by kids. And some of the solutions we may not agree with as adults. We help kids analyze those solutions. Sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. It's okay. The idea is that kids are analyzing, they're taking into consideration multiple people's perspectives and coming up with a good solution or maybe a revised solution in response to that. So I'm going to run through Bethany's example here. Bethany was a student in one of the first couple of years that we were doing this in one of our programs. And one of the things I noticed with Bethany is that towards the end of the day, it was like the last hour of the day, her behavior just started to get unpredictable. And she would like stir things up with another student or maybe with a staff member. And there was always something going on that created a shift of focus to Bethany and her situation at the end of the day. And it was extremely frustrating and stressful for me because we're trying to like wrap things up and get kids ready to go home. And it was a problem. And so what I did is I went to Bethany. I'm like, hey, Bethany, this is what I noticed. Like the last hour of the day, you kind of tend to like wind things up or your behavior suddenly shifts and changes. I'm like, what's up with that? Like, what's going on? And she's like, oh, well, I just don't want to go home. Like, I hate going home after school. I'm like, oh, okay, well, what's going on with that? She's like, my siblings recently have been like horrible to me. And she said they're abusive to me. And she's like, I just don't want to go home. So anything to derail or delay that, like, I just don't want to go home. And so I said, wow, I can understand like why you would not want to go home. I mean, if I was in that same position, I would not want to go home to my siblings either. I said, I totally get where you're at. And I said, here's kind of my perspective where I'm coming from. At the end of the day, like I'm trying to get everyone round up and kind of short up in the classroom. And it's really stressful and frustrating for me when my attention is now diverted to working with you on your situation. And I said, can you see how that might be frustrating for me? And she's like, yeah, yeah. And she wasn't intending to do that, but it's helping her see that her behavior has an impact on me. And I said, Bethany, what I need is to be able to have some predictable behavior from you at the end of the day so that we can, wrap up and get home. And so I said, Bethany, here's the deal. You need to not go home. I need to have predictable behavior at the end of the day. What are some ideas that you have that we can both get what we need? And so she came up with some ideas. There were 3 ideas. One, she said she could go to her mom's work after school. 2, she had 4. 2, she can enroll in an after-school program. 3, we could help her get her bike fixed so that she could not go home and go somewhere else. And 4, she said we had LA Fitness passes at the time for kids. And she's like, if one of those passes was in my name, she was old enough where she could ride her bike to LA Fitness and do that as kind of an alternative to going home. And so some of those I knew were not going to work right off the bat, but I didn't say no to any of them. I didn't say, oh, that's not going to work. I said, okay, we've got 4 ideas. Now let's evaluate those. Let's look at the first one. If you were to go to your mom's place of work, I go, tell me what you think about that. She's like, well, I could do that, but I don't think her coworkers would really appreciate that. I think it would create a problem for her. I'm like, okay, let's maybe take that one off. How about the second one? After school program. She's like, yeah, we could do that, but it's going to take a lot to be able to like get that set up. And she goes, I really think the easiest one is to just fix the bike. And if we fix the bike, then I have some alternatives. And so we helped her get her bike fixed, and that took care of the issue. And obviously mom was involved, you know, in terms of that, the solution to that. But the idea was, I didn't look at the situation and say, Bethany, here's what needs to happen. It was, Bethany, here's what I'm seeing happening. What's going on? Oh, I had no idea. Yeah, I can see why you're doing that. And she gets to see my perspective. She's not trying to create frustration for me at the end of the day. She's just trying to survive life, right? And so she landed on solutions. She evaluated those and we implemented, and it was successful. So that is what's called cognitive collaboration, where we're pulling kids into the problem solving process and asking them to be part of solving solutions or coming up with some strategies.
So one of our recommendations is at staff meetings that we're not solving problems for students. So what we'll do is part of our agenda, we'll identify a challenge or concern that we are having with the student, and then we'll identify the adult who's going to approach the student and invite them into a problem-solving process. What we found was spending an hour, 2 hours trying to problem solve solutions for kids wasn't very effective, because we would then put this practice into place and it didn't actually get to the root cause of what was going on. And so by bringing it to the student, and now it wasn't always easy. One of mine took about 8 months for this one problem. But we went back to it again and again. So that is one of our recommendations. I'm going to skip through. I have a couple more examples, but I think you get it. It's the same as same process that John shared with us. And so I'm going to skip down here to our framework. And so when we're looking at the framework, this is how we're able to collaborate with our partners. And so our recommendation is that we first work on our why, our mission statement. Next, we're going to work on our how, or our values. And then lastly, we're going to look at the what, or the details. What specific practices we're going to put in place. This comes from Simon Sinek's work. He's a bit more in the business world, but it works very well for us. And on the next slide, what you'll see is an example of one of our partners and what they came up with. And so my job in this process with this particular partner was to help them develop this out. Okay. And so you'll see their why at the top there. Then you'll see their value words. And then the practices aren't even defined. So they definitely defined practices, but that took some time. And so my job to collaborating with them was to make sure that whatever practices they put in place, they were in alignment with their values and with their why, or their purpose for the program. And we had some bumps along the road because we had to continually go back. Does this fit our values? And does this fit our purpose? And as they were building out their handbook, they said, no, it doesn't. We actually said we want to do this for this program. And so they had the experience of developing out other programs. And so for them, it was kind of like, oh, we'll just borrow this from this handbook and bring it over here. But it didn't necessarily line up. And so we had to just process through with it.
And if I can just add real quick, the takeaway with this is when we first started doing this work in 2010, 2011, we didn't have anything that looked like this. It wasn't really defined. It was really a kind of a 20,000 foot, like, here's kind of the idea, here's kind of where we want to go, but we didn't really know what it looked like. If you are starting a program, it doesn't need to look like this. We call ours the C5. This particular system calls it the Odyssey program. It doesn't really matter. And you can see that their areas are very different. The reason we're showing this to you is because if you're looking at program design, it's critical to have some type of documentation in terms of what are the values that drive this program. We often hear that, oh, this program's really good. Why is it good? Well, because we have a great teacher. And as soon as that teacher leaves, so does the greatness of the program. And so what we want to do is encourage you to create a model that sustains regardless of the teachers that move into that model. So these are just some examples of other partners and how they've done that. A student handbook for this one, Restorative Justice Circles, is a part of what they do. It's a strategy, if you will, that they have in there. So just a quick sample to say, be intentional, spend, 6 months, 4 months if you need to pull a team together and create for this particular program we're developing. What is it driven by in terms of values? Last thing I want to leave with here, I know I'm looking at the time, we're a little short on time to finish this up. Once you have a program model or design, we would encourage you to have some type of fidelity measure around that program. This is an example of something that we put together, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. We use the TFI, which is kind of the gold standard, if you will, for PBIS implementations as a model or a structure for doing this. And so what we'll do is apply this fidelity measure to programs once or twice throughout the year, and then we're able to measure growth. So in this example, you'll see on the left-hand side where this particular program started with regard to each of those 5 components, and then post support, if you will, and this was internally what we wanted to look at is our support of that program creating or yielding improvements. And so I think it's important that, number one, you have a defined program, and number 2, you have a way to give people feedback on how well that program is being implemented. Only then can you ask the question, is this actually effective in changing outcomes with kids? So we're going to come back to Q&A in just a minute. I wanted to give you, just because of time, wanted to give you some additional pieces. Our website has some more information on this particular program model. We're not saying that this model is the way to go. What we're saying is this is what we've come up with, and we've shared some of our kind of learnings, if you will, through implementing those 5 core components. We would love for you to give us feedback. There's embedded in the presentation, the PDF is a link to that. And I think Nico or Don, I'm not sure. I think we're going to place that in the chat if it's not already there, but we would love feedback from you in terms of how valuable was this for you? How could we better this for you? And then there's also an area in there that you can select if you want additional supports or information on that. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to contact Kenny directly, here's his contact information. Kenny is the go-to, the guru, the expert in our organization in terms of this work. He's on the ground in programs, as he said, on pretty much on a weekly basis, and is very knowledgeable in this area. So if you have any further questions for him, please feel free to reach out.